Hello everyone and welcome to another video with me, 320 Sim Pilot, and today we have some more flight simulator hardware for you. This time of course it's the Honeycomb Aeronautical Alpha, Yoke and Bravo Throttle Quadrant. I am a real-world commercial pilot, so I'm just going to give you some of my thoughts and perspectives on these pieces of hardware, especially as I've been trying out a few bits of hardware recently for flight simulators in general, and I wanted to take a look at these. A lot of you recommended I take a look at them after my last video on the Turtle Beach Velocity 1 flight. I was not sent these. I've borrowed these off a friend, so I haven't got them for long. We're not going to look in too much detail at the setup. We'll just be looking at the hardware and the feel and my thoughts on the functionality, or some of the functionality of these pieces of equipment. They are quite pricey. You're looking at over £500 to £550 if you want both of these in the UK. They are obviously sold separately, so you can just have one or the other as you see fit. So to start with, let's take a look at the Honeycomb Alpha Yoke. As you can see here, sat on the desk next to the Bravo. They are both about the same size, fairly big, but a very high functionality included in both of them. As you can see here, we've got master avionics switches and also even a starter or magneto switch, all included on the Yoke on its own. There is no throttle axes at all, so you'd have to think up a way of doing that or get your own throttle. So that is the downside there. You'll need to come up with your own. This is the Bravo Throttle Quadrant, which uses its own USB connection, so they're each independently plugged into the computer, so you can separate them. You don't need them next to each other like I've got them here, but this seemed like quite a comfortable positioning. Both very high quality, covered in this matte sort of satin finish, textured plastic. Very nice feel indeed. So here you go, Honeycomb Aeronautical. We're going to start off by looking at their Alpha Yoke. The video will start off with a look at the Yoke, then we'll look at the Throttle Quadrant a bit later. So very nice indeed. As you can see, that is a full-size UK with a number pad keyboard behind there. So it is quite a big object. It has a relatively simple clamping mechanism. So you clamp a sort of plate onto the table and then you can just slot this on top. Very simple, very nice indeed. Over here we have the master switches and avionics switches. So it's great to have this. A bit of fun, very common in general aviation, piston style, or even turboprop aircraft, maybe even some jets. But they're just sort of two-position light plastic switches. Not particularly premium feeling, but then again, the real ones in aircraft don't tend to be. Airplanes are full of cheap, or not cheap, but certainly light plastic to save weight. Here's the magneto switch, so you have off, right, left, both, and start. The only thing I notice here is it doesn't spring back from start to both. In a real aircraft, you have to hold it in start, like in your car. This one doesn't. The roll axes in the Yoke is very nice. You've got a good range of travel, 180 degrees of travel, so that is about what real aircraft use, so that's absolutely spot on. It's quite light, so there isn't much resistance in the roll axes for my feel, and there's also not too much dampening, but there is a little bit more perhaps than the Turtle Beach Velocity 1, but the dampening is not an issue because you're not really going to be letting go of the Yoke like that whilst operating the aircraft. It's just quite common in flight simulator hardware to have that sort of springy effect as you let go. These buttons on top, then you've got an autopilot disconnect button. You've got some rocker switches there you could use for trim, rudder trim or aileron trim. And over on the left hand side you've got your pitch trim, your view hat switch, and a button. There is a trigger button as well by your index finger on the left hand side, and also a little white button on top used to reset the view, which is nice. Pitch axis is good. It's much heavier than the roll axis. I would actually have preferred a slightly more even feel, but it is very smooth. It's just much heavier than the roll, which is feels a little bit strange at first, but something you'd definitely get used to. Very premium feel indeed. And there's the hat switch in use. A little bit hard to reach the hat switch sometimes. You have to sort of position your thumb up over the trim switch, so it's occasionally something you need to remember to do or to get used to. Not a huge issue, but something I did notice. So overall, very nice, a very premium feeling unit, very sturdy and completely smooth. So the functionality and the sensors are all just spot on. Great to have the extra buttons and the light switches, good bit of fun. And I do enjoy having a starter switch like that. And I do like that sort of red glow through the honeycomb in the background. Moving on to the Bravo Throttle Quadrant now. First of all, the landing gear lever. It has a good range of travel, nice, functional, and includes those 3 greens above it, which do also work and go red when the gear isn't down and locked. So that is a good piece of design. I really like that. Then we have a trim wheel, which is functional. It works in the sim, which is very nice. I like the white bit on it so you can see as it's spinning. It doesn't obviously motor around or anything like that. You can only control it yourself, but it does work. I, to be honest, found myself using the electronic trim switches on the Yoke a bit more. I found this trim wheel a little bit light and also a little bit hard to find, but totally functional if you wanted to use it. I then have the throttles set up with the handles for general aviation. These are included along with a set of commercial handles, which we will look at later. So this is the general aviation setup, all included in the box. You've got 2 throttles, 2 propeller RPM levers, the blue ones, and then at the end the 2 red mixture levers. So they have good friction on all the axes, which is also adjustable. So you can have it very tight so that it is almost quite difficult to move them. So they're not going to go anywhere by accident, and they feel as resistant, if not more so, than the real aircraft. If you were to tighten that up, they'll be more resistant than the real airplane. So absolutely no problems there. Very nice feel. Then you have a little light warning panel that does work, which I was very impressed with. So out of the box in Microsoft Flight Simulator, these lights were working, parking brake, low fuel, things like that. Very good. We also have those rocker switches just above them. They seem to double up with a lot of controls from the Yoke, but you could think of something to assign to them, I'm sure. Here we have the Autopilot control panel, which is very premium feeling. We're going to talk about it later on in the video. Very interesting design. On the right hand side we have a general aviation style flap lever which just rocks back into the middle position. Problem with that is that of course you can't actually see what's selected, but it is functional and it does feel very nice to use as well. On the right hand side of all the throttles we have the little control which you can use to adjust the friction. As I said, I found that there was plenty of friction available for whatever your taste is, and feels absolutely lovely to use. I also like the position. I like the way the throttles are slightly lower than your desk, which puts it in a really ergonomic position. Your hand falls quite naturally. And in this setup for general aviation, I'm really impressed. This throttle quadrant is a remarkable piece of design with so many controls fitted into it. I was really impressed, and as ever, the feel and premium quality of it really shines through. Amazing to have the warning lights, the trim wheel, and then all those general aviation handles, and also we'll look later at the commercial aviation handles. So here we are now using it in flight, and I'm just going to demonstrate that the gear lever works. Look at that, the gear comes up, red lights whilst the gear is in transit, telling you it's not locked, and then they go out when it's up, which is the right way, of course, and then you can bring the flaps up with this lever. But of course, you have to find a way you have to look around in the cockpit to see whether those flaps have traveled. Now that is quite normal in a real aircraft, but obviously slightly inconvenient if your screen isn't already showing the flaps when you're using a simulator at home. So flying with the Yoke is obviously absolutely fine. It feels very nice. As I've said earlier, it's lighter in the roll and slightly heavier in the pitch than I would have expected. So that's something you'll just get used to. Airplanes all have different feel. It's almost like an airplane like a Tomahawk, where you have a T-tail design because it doesn't have the prop wash over the elevator, which gives you that extra weight. That's what it reminds me of anyway. Trim switch works nicely, but as we said earlier, reaching the hat switch can be a little bit of a pain. You have to lift your hand off the Yoke a bit and stretch over to find it. Not a major problem, of course. It just depends how much you use your hat switch, and if you're using the Autopilot, it won't be a problem at all. But something I certainly noticed. But no, it all feels very nice to use. RPM levers worked. I was also impressed with Microsoft Flight Simulator. This is the Baron, of course, and it worked pretty much straight out of the box. I had to just download one piece of software, but I didn't do any real configuring. It just worked straight away. So here's the Autopilot. Now this is very interesting. I haven't used an Autopilot like this. I believe it's based on a real one, but what you have to do is select the modes you want, and then you can change with the left hand knob which mode you're going to adjust, and then using the right hand control you can turn it. So here I'm turning it to select the I think that's the heading bug, and then I can twist this and adjust the heading bug, and you should see as I turn it to the left, the heading bug goes left and the airplane turns. So for this to work right out of the box, you can just engage the Autopilot using that button on the right and then control it like this. It's brilliant. It works better for headings than it does for vertical modes. Vertical modes are a bit more complicated. Do you want to climb in a speed mode or a vertical speed mode? It does work, but in some airplanes I found it slightly more fiddly, so it'd take probably a bit of programming or customization to get the best out of it. It's also quite difficult to tell which mode you've selected to adjust down here, so you find yourself looking in and then out, then in and then out. But again, the functionality is there, and that's the sacrifice. To have it all in one unit is that you need to be able to make a little bit of a compromise, but it's still it does actually do what it says it's going to do, which is really impressive. So here we go. I think I'm adding on a bit of vertical speed now and getting the airplane to climb, and it just does it for you. Very nice. So overall, again, very impressed with this throttle quadrant. The amount of functionality and the premium feel of it all do add up. It is quite pricey for just the throttle quadrant, and it doesn't have detents, which is going to be an issue for us being Airbus pilots on this channel. And we're going to talk about that now as we move on to the commercial handles. So for general aviation, absolutely excellent, works really, really nicely. So moving on to the commercial handles, these are also included in the box. This Boeing style. The Airbus handles that Honeycomb make are separate. They are a separate purchase. So these simply clip onto the axes. It's a very clever mechanism. It works very well. You can see the metal contactors where there's certain switches in some of the levers and some of them there aren't. So you get 4 of these throttles, Boeing style throttles, to fit on, which obviously allows you to fly a 4-engine aircraft, but you could just use 2 and you can blank out the other axes. They give you some rubber covers, so you could just have the 2 and it wouldn't look too silly if you wanted to set it up like that. Flap lever on the far right. So, and that's a speed brake lever on the far left, of course. So that's your 6 axes. So you've got 4 engines, flaps, and speed brakes. Now, this is great. This is as you would expect from a real aircraft, but as you can see, as I slide the flap lever, it of course is fitting into detents. Commercial airliners nearly always have detents or notches for where your flaps will go. And in this, you don't have that. So you have to sort of judge where you've slid it to and then look down and see where the lever's gone, or look at the indicator to show where the flaps have actually traveled to. Again, not a huge deal, but just something notable when you don't have detents. Speed brake lever doesn't need detents, works absolutely perfectly as it is. And here's the throttles. They, again, great friction. Handles feel great. I really enjoy it. And having 4 is a great bit of fun. There's no doubt about it. With a little reverser levers which you can use. You don't actually need to use them as far as I can tell. As you pull it back through idle at the bottom, it simply activates a switch, a button that you use to command it into reverse. So that's fine. They're just not actually locking it out. You can pull it through even without lifting those up. Just there you go, just as I demonstrate there. Not a problem, but just something of note. It also has a go-around button built into it, which is great. And yeah, they look really good, and they're a good bit of fun to have, especially if you've always fantasized about flying around a Boeing 747. So there we go, just some of my sort of entirely genuine thoughts I've had since I've just had a little bit of time to have a go with this piece of hardware. Both feel really premium. I'm particularly impressed with the throttle quadrant. It's an amazing piece of design, and I think for general aviation it is absolutely brilliant. For commercial aviation, it's just lacking some functionality by not having those detents, of course. That's where for Airbus flying, it's going to have to be the Thrustmaster TCA that still wins for me, just because it has all the detents available, both for the flap levers and, of course, the engine's flex gates and so on. But, of course, Boeings don't use detents. So if you're flying around 747s or the default 787 in Microsoft Flight Simulator, then this is going to be a really excellent way to do it. And again, you can't beat that feeling of having four little thrust levers in your hands. It's really nice. And the quality feel just comes out from all of these aspects. You can buy Airbus controls, but that's a whole separate video. I haven't seen them. So here we go, a little comparison just to show you the travel compared to the Turtle Beach Velocity 1, as I happen to have both in the house at the same time. So there you go. They both do the 180 degrees of travel, which is absolutely what you need. I think that's great that we've got to that point now. And there's more pitch travel in the Honeycomb than in the Turtle Beach. That's the only thing I noticed. It's also heavier in pitch in the Honeycomb than the Turtle Beach. So in summary then, what are my thoughts on the Honeycomb Alpha and Bravo yoke and throttle quadrants? So, as I said at the start, these are just my thoughts on these, having borrowed them off a friend for a short amount of time. But the Honeycomb Alpha yoke is a really, really nice device. It has some excellent functionality with the extra switches for the master switches and for the magneto rocker switch. I do like that. I also like the feel of the yoke, firstly in your hands, but also the smoothness of all the controls. As I said at the start, I find the roll axis a little bit light, especially when compared to the slightly heavy pitch axes, but these are things that you'll certainly get used to. I also would have liked to see the hat switch in a slightly more ergonomic place, or perhaps another one on the other side as well, but these are just preferences. It's quite pricey, but you can see where the money goes, and it's nice to have, of course, the full roll 180 degrees. That's sort of crucial, I think, to any sort of hardware these days. Moving on then to the Honeycomb Bravo throttle quadrant, and this to me is the star of the show. This is a really premium feeling device, as we said earlier, but it also has so much functionality, and it's a real impressive piece of design, and you can see that the team who made it have thought a lot about it when putting it together. For general aviation, it is absolutely spot on. You've got 6 axes, good resistance, you've got your trim wheel, you've got your autopilot controls, you've got your rocker switches, you've got your flaps available even when you're using 6 axes, and you've also got that landing gear switch or control with the gear indicator lights. I mean, this is just great, and to have all of that in one package, it's really very nice. They've also done a great thing by lowering it down so that, as you can see, it's sitting slightly lower than the yoke, so that the throttle levers, or all the levers, don't come up too high on the desk, which makes them fall into just a nice place to use when you're flying using the yoke. So that is a really nice touch. We talked earlier about using it for commercial aviation, so for jetliners and things like that. And this is one side of it that perhaps I would find it slightly less functional, simply because it doesn't have detents, and we primarily fly Airbuses on this channel. So without those detents, it's a little bit tricky to set climb, flex, toga. Totally possible, and I'm sure you could get used to it, or you could find your own methods. Same for the flap lever. I would have liked to see an option to have detents on the flap lever, just so that you know what you're setting with it, like most commercial aircraft have. But this is a compromise to have so much functionality in the one unit, and I can understand why. But yeah, for flying an Airbus, I'll probably be back to my Thrustmaster TC8. In fact, I will be, just because it means I can feel where I'm putting the thrust levers and then check it, obviously, on the screens as we would in the real aircraft. But if you're using the Honeycomb Bravo, there are Airbus handles available. I haven't tried them out, so I'm sure the comments will be full of people telling me that I should have used those. So yeah, one day perhaps I'll get a chance to try those out as well. If you're using it for Boeings, however, who don't have detents in most of their aircraft, then these are going to be absolutely spot on. And for the 747, 787, 737, things like that is going to be a great bit of fun. So that's what you primarily fly. Yeah, having all those axes, the detents, aren't going to be such an issue, because you're going to have your speed brakes and your throttle's going to act smoothly. So really nice, good bit of fun, and of course you can swap over to general aviation if you want to. As ever with my hardware videos, I just try to show you as much of it as I can and give you a bit of my opinions on some of the features, but really it's going to be a personal preference as to whether this sort of equipment suits you. This is an expensive unit at over £500 for both, and you do need some sort of throttle to go with the yoke if you're going to have the yoke. So it's purely personal decision, of course, but I've been really impressed with it, and I think as I said, the Bravo Quadrant is a really impressive thing in general. But you need to think about your use case and also the space it takes up on your desk. As you can see, it really does dominate. So that's something else that you might want to consider when you're looking at a yoke style unit over a joystick. Anyway, that's all for this video. There'll be more Airbus guides, we'll have tutorials, live streams, and of course some more hardware coming up in the future. So do please subscribe if you'd like to see more of that. Otherwise, thank you very much for watching. We'll see you again in another of those videos or live streams very soon. Thank you. Bye bye.